to you. Nobody saw that coming.
Say that this was predicted or that we expected this would be a lie. And I totally agree with that. I think
now on FirstWARN Tri-Cities, a FirstWARN Tri-Cities special presentation. The floods no one saw coming. The East Kentucky floods 1 year later. Featuring Brandon Robinson of WYMT TV, Logan Hamilton of FirstWARN Tri-Cities, Storm Chaser Reed Timmer, and the National Weather Service office in Jackson, Kentucky. Now your host, FirstWARN Tri-Cities Chief Forecaster, Skylar Doyle.
Good evening and welcome to this FirstWARN Tri-Cities special presentation. The floods no one saw coming. The East Kentucky floods 1 year later. I'm FirstWARN Tri-Cities Chief Forecaster Skylar Doyle, and during the next 45 minutes to an hour, we will look back at the floods from 1 year ago when people went to bed on July 27th of 2022 in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. They didn't know that when they woke up on the morning of July 28th that their lives would be changed forever. Now Brandon Robinson of WYMT TV in Hazard, Kentucky, takes us to the event from the forecasting to the aftermath.
I was actually filling in for our evening guy, Evan Hatter, who was off that week on vacation, and we knew that the ground was saturated. We knew that there was probably going to be a lot more rain in the days to come. But if anybody told you that event was going to happen, they would be lying to you. Nobody saw that coming. That was a historic event. So it rained just about every day, at least some up until that day. We started looking Monday at the possibility for some flooding. We had a feeling that, we usually typically have flooding around that time of the year in this part of the woods. And we kind of had an expectation that we thought, okay, maybe this is be kind of an event where you might see some significant rainfall, some significant moisture. But the ingredients that worked into that system worked out unlike anything we've ever seen. Basically, you had two fronts that were in play. You had them stall out basically back to back leading up to the event. So that was the catalyst that kind of brought all that rain in here and set up the night of. The rain actually started here in Hazard about 8 o'clock. So I do believe here was kind of the setup for the main event. So we got some pretty heavy rain early in the evening. We're doing a Facebook Live, kind of taking people through it. By the time we got to 11 o'clock news, it was pouring the rain. And I got back on Facebook around, I guess it was around midnight or so. And we got into overnight program, and the reports kept coming in. The water's up here. The water's up here. I was listening to our live desk is in the newsroom, so I was hearing scanner traffic saying that search and rescue teams being called out, our departments being called out for water rescues. And I was like, well, we're in overnight coverage now. I'm gonna go get on the air for just a little bit. That was right around 1 o'clock. So I came in here and got on the air. Our morning producer, put me on Facebook as well. And I'd been on air maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and I had my phone in my hand because on our weather system, our on-air weather system, it only shows 4 warnings at a time, and we had many more than 4 warnings at a time. So I was going to scroll through and read them off my phone. So I had my phone in my hand when it started buzzing, and I was like, I looked down at it, flash flood emergency. And I looked over here. We've got a monitor over here in the back that's got the weather service chat pulled up. So I walked off screen to look at it to see exactly, okay, where is this for? How long does it last? It was, and then Cameron, Aaron, our weekend guy, who was filling for me on the morning, he texted me and said a flash flood emergency. He's from Alabama. He'd never seen anything like that. It's always tornado warnings for them. So he said, I've never seen anything like this. And then Steve Hensley, our main anchor, who went home for the night, was texting, and it just started coming. And then I think what kind of, I don't want to say enhanced our coverage, but where I had my phone in my hand, I was literally reading messages that I was getting on air. I was trying to show pictures on air. I was sending once Cameron got here, about 10 or 15 minutes later, he was already coming in anyway. He'd wake and get ready to come in. But when he got here, I started sending them over to him, and we pulled them up on air through a computer that we have access to. And it just, I think the later into the night it got, the more of the scope of devastation that we were able to tell. Thursday, that Friday morning, when I finally got to scroll on my phone after I'd got up and was just kind of hanging out for a little bit, is when the scope really hit me. Just seeing people that I have known my entire life posting pictures and reports and things that you just don't expect to see. You just don't expect to see where you're from, where you live. I'm from Harlan County originally, and Harlan County has had its share of floods over the years, but it missed Harlan County completely. It got the house, it got Letcher County, it got Knott County, it got part of Floyd County, it got Breathitt and Perry counties, it got part of Pike County, got a little bit of Leslie County, got a little bit of Owsley County. I mean, it was just such a concentrated, clustered area that it was just so kind of odd in a way. And the devastation was, I mean, Letcher and Knott County, the whole county, you'd be hard pressed to find anywhere that didn't have some kind of devastation. As Eastern Kentuckians do, we rallied together really quickly. And I believe we still called them severe weather alert days back then. That was before we rebranded. We were in a severe weather alert day for probably 2 weeks straight, even after the flood, because we had more rain. We stayed in it when a heat advisory was issued. And I tell you what, I will give a major shout out to the National Weather Service over at Jackson. They basically, there's a criteria that their office has to issue heat advisories. And it didn't quite meet it, but they did it anyway because they knew people didn't have power. They had no way to stay cool. Trying to clean up from flooding, you're going to get hot, you're going to get overexerted, you may not have water to drink. So I mean, they were really going above and beyond at that point to try to keep people safe. So we were, I was off. I was actually the part of the deal that I had made when Evan was off. Cameron and I worked 6 days. So I worked that Saturday after all the mess. And then on Sunday, I went and volunteered at the high school where I live, just helping with flood relief. So it was for me, even me personally, it was a nonstop, but I couldn't imagine seeing, all of the people who just came together and got right to work, rolled their sleeves up, rolled their pants up in some ways to keep out of the water or whatever, and just got to work. And I mean, we're almost a year later, there's still work to be done. I mean, this is not going to be a one and done, cleanup affair. It's going to take probably years, honestly. Things about a week later or so, we did a issues and answers, kind of talking about it, recapping it and all that with the Weather Service and us. And Steve Hensley asked me, he said, was this the worst event you've ever covered, worst weather event you've ever covered? I was like, no, at that point, it really hadn't sunk in yet. I was like, no, probably the March 2nd tornado outbreak back in 2012. And the more I think of it, this is absolutely the worst weather event that I've covered here in almost 16 years at WYMT. So, I mean, it's been a long time, and I've covered a lot of severe weather, but I mean, that takes the cake.
I was very honored to be able to interview Jane Marie Wicks, the warning coordination meteorologist for the National Weather Service in Jackson, Kentucky. The Weather Service office in Jackson covers all of eastern Kentucky to the Tennessee and Virginia state line. Jane says not even the National Weather Service saw an event like this coming to the area. Okay, so first off, thank you for joining us. And so tell us a little bit, first off, just about the days leading up to the flood event on the 28th, the forecasting that went in.
Yeah, so leading up to the event, we had several rounds of heavy rain that went through eastern Kentucky. So we were pretty well primed. We even had some flash flood watches and some heightened threats the days leading up to the biggest rainfall. So to say that we had dry soil or that like we weren't expecting like a large amount of rain is not true, but we weren't expecting that much rain. And we knew that we were going to be seeing rain. We knew that we'd be seeing heavy rain, but no model had exactly where the heavy rain was going to set up. It didn't have the magnitude of the heavy rain. And then on top of that, already being saturated just led to the fact that like none of the rain really was absorbed. It just ran off. And so I think I saw an excerpt where you had interviewed Brandon Robinson. He said to say that this was predicted or that we expected this would be a lie. And I totally agree with that. I think leading up to it, we knew that we were prime. We knew that we would see some flash flooding. We had flash flood watches out. But to say the amount of rain and the time frame that we got it and where it was going to impact, no model had that in their solutions. And if they did, it was too little too late. We look at a lot of models. We look at hundreds of models, and maybe one out of that 100 had something similar. And if you are a forecaster, how are you going to pick that one model that shows up on one run and say this is what's going to happen? And even then, it would have been off on the timing or on the location. So it was a tough one because I don't think anyone had expected what actually occurred.
So the night of the 27th into the 28th, you guys at the National Weather Service office was very busy issuing
Yes.
flash flood warnings and flash flood emergencies. And flash flood emergencies is the highest tier that you can go in flood warning in any type of flood warning. So talk us through, how that process went of issuing a flash flood emergency and the talks that went into that.
Yeah, so I was not here that night. We had a forecaster that was on an evening shift, and he got held over into the midnight shift, and he was the primary one issuing all those warnings. And a little bit of insight, the more data you have to make decisions to upgrade these warnings, the better. And in this case, we didn't have a lot of the data. The flooding was happening and the rainfall was happening so fast. When we issued those initial flash flood warnings, they didn't alert people's phones. It's how that's set up on your phone system. You don't get an alert until it's a considerable or a catastrophic or flash flood emergency tag. So he was actually issuing flash flood warnings probably around 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. as the thing was slowly sinking south. The line was slowly sinking south. But as we went later into the night and he was looking at the radar estimated rainfall, he started upgrading those warnings pretty quickly to considerable and then the flash flood emergency tags. But by that point, we did not have a lot of ground data. Our mesonets, we weren't getting some of that information in, especially once the rainfall got so high that some of our mesonets actually got wiped out. We lost communications across a lot of Eastern Kentucky. It's the middle of the night. So the amount of data that we were getting into the office was very limited. He was really going off of radar estimated rainfall. And so when you consider the decisions he was making and for such a large area and for so many flash flood emergencies, really relying solely on radar data is pretty impressive that he was able to get the warnings out in the way that he did, because we just didn't have a lot of data coming into the office. We didn't know what was actually happening on the ground until after it was happening.
And you mentioned losing communication. That's a common theme I've heard through all the interviews I've done. So just, how concerning is it at the Weather Service office when you start to lose the communication across Eastern Kentucky or when you start to lose the mesonet sites?
Yeah, so we are used to having some difficulty with communications around the area. We were very fortunate at the Weather Service. We never lost communications. If we were to lose communications at the Weather Service office, we could not stop our services to the public. And so another office would take over for us. And we were very fortunate that we never had to do that. But as you mentioned, getting data into the office is also very crucial. And so when we start losing communications, we lose that data into the office and people being able to communicate with the office. And that includes emergency management. It includes it includes the public, just people trying to get information to the office. We were very fortunate that WYMT media was on air and able to stay on air, and we had a chat system so that we were able to communicate with them throughout the event. So they were really our lifeline as to getting information in at a certain point, once a lot of the communications had failed, as we were able to stay online with them. And so I think a lot of their newscast that night and our warnings were kind of going hand in hand. I think it was kind of a two-way communication as they were getting reports in and we were getting information in and sharing it throughout the night. So that was a valuable resource.
So, after the event, all the devastation, and as we go to the aftermath of it, not only did folks have to deal, with total devastation across many communities in eastern Kentucky, but the heat started to ramp up and temperatures in the 90s, and you guys actually broke your criteria of a heat advisory to issue that to warn people that heat was coming.
Yeah, I think that was very, very crucial, because when you have that many people that are displaced, that many people that are out helping, the rescue workers, the people that were involved, everyone that was outside during that, it doesn't matter if you're a couple degrees away from a heat advisory criteria, the impact is what matter. And when you have that many people outside and it's that hot and it's that humid, you're going to start to have impacts. And so we thought it was very crucial that we go ahead and issue that, just to give a little bit more, I think, awareness of the potential for heat and heat related illnesses, and making sure that people were hydrated, making sure they were able to get out of the heat if needed. And because of that, we actually, a lot of the rescue workers, they had to make extra preparations when they went out to make sure they had extra water. We were able to deliver extra water to the people that were affected as well, to try to make sure that they stayed safe within that heat.
So, as we approach the 1 year anniversary of the event, many people still, when it starts heavy rain in eastern Kentucky, they still get scared. But can you talk about how this event is, at least to this magnitude, unlikely to happen in a long time?
Yeah, I totally understand when people that were impacted, especially, there's PTSD that comes with that, and there will be for many years. And even people here at the office were affected. It is a thing that we deal with in Eastern Kentucky. We are used to heavy rains, we're used to flooding, but we weren't used to flooding of that magnitude. The amount of rainfall that we received during that event was off the charts. When you look at the potential for that amount of rain and that amount of time, it literally was not listed on any chart. It was unprecedented, completely unprecedented. So it, I think, was about a 7 to 9 inch range of rainfall that you could get over a 3 to 4 day period. Was like a 1 in 1,000 year chance. We exceeded that, like far exceeded that. So the likelihood of us seeing something of that magnitude again is very, very low. Could we see impacts, and could we see flooding again, and could we see really bad flooding in Eastern Kentucky? Sure, it's Eastern Kentucky. We see heavy rainfall. We're in the mountains. It happens all the time. And I think a lot of the, I guess, the scared really goes into helping prepare yourself for the next event. Instead of being scared, how can we do things to make it better the next time? Are we expecting a rain like that next time? Hopefully never again. It's a very, very, very small chance. But will we see flooding again? Probably so. And how do we make our community better for the next one?
So, and just so people, can understand, how do the mountains play a different role within the flood?
Yeah, so especially when we were already saturated, that didn't help things. But when you think about a plain field, a even field across a large area, and you get 3 inches of rain, that means that every single person along that plain field gets 3 inches of rain. When you add mountains into it, most of our population lives within the valleys of the mountains. They live within the floodplains. They live where the creeks and the streams are. And a lot of the rain that falls on the mountains has to go somewhere. It's not just going to stay on the mountain. It's going to flow down the mountain. So for the locations that are in the valleys and in the floodplains, you're not only getting like 2 to 3 inches of rain, but you're getting the 2 to 3 inches of rain from every mountainside that's coming down as well. So you're magnifying the amount of rain. So it makes it a lot easier to flood in Eastern Kentucky. We also have a lot of the headwaters of the creeks and the streams for the state. So we're very flashy. They're not as large as they are maybe in the central and western part of the state. And so it doesn't take as much water to cause them to rise and go out of their banks. And you add into that the extra rainfall coming from the mountains, it's very easy for us to quickly go up and quickly go down with any of the rainfall and the river flooding that we see.
All right. Do you have anything else that you want to add to tell people as we approach the 1 year anniversary of the event?
Yeah, our hearts go out. Our hearts go out. Our staff was impacted as well, and it's really rough to see your community. We all live in this area as well, and it's really rough to see your community and your friends and your family go through this. So our hearts go out to everyone that was impacted from this flood and continues to be impacted. I really want to stress that we are here. We are here for our community. Our goal is to help protect you all. And so as we move forward, we're trying to find better ways to help make our community more resilient. And I think we've been working with communities. I think communities are more aware now of flooding and where to build and where not to build. But I know that we will continue to strive to make our community stronger in the wake of flash flooding.
FirstWARN Tri-Cities field correspondent Logan Hamilton went to the hardest hit areas of Southwest Virginia and Eastern Kentucky on the night of the flooding disaster. Logan even had the chance to go in with the National Guard to help with rescue efforts. Here is Logan sharing his story for the first time with us exclusively on FirstWARN Tri-Cities.
So, originally entered Pound, could see that the road flooded, even from the highway. Had talked to the National Guard. Had, appreciated the water that I'd give them and stuff, and then they'd asked me if I had any specific training or anything, and I told them, I had medical and stuff like that. So they asked me if I would be willing to go to Wattsburg, Kentucky, and help out with the National Guard up there. So from that moment, I didn't stay in Pound much. I saw a little bit when the sun come up of some flooded roadways and stuff, but they sent me immediately to Kentucky. And whenever I got into Wattsburg, originally couldn't see too much because early in the morning, but once the lot had come up, it was unbelievable. That place looked like it had been entirely swallowed by water. So I actually got to witness a lot of some of their search and rescue, and was kind of assisted on the back burner. Just did whatever they told me to do to help out and stuff. Man, upper bottom was a complete disaster. It's so flat in the bottom, and it's like right along with the river. So I mean, there was just so much water, at least like 6 to 8 feet easily on the sides of houses. And it was just, I don't know, it was honestly a worse nightmare situation because even before getting into Wattsburg, as I was traveling down, you'll have to pull it up, the highway that goes down from Jenkins, Kentucky to Wattsburg. That highway was a river. There was so much water even on the highway that it was almost impossible to get through. I had to park in a little area up outside of Wattsburg, and whoever the National Guard was that was there driving in, they actually allowed me to go with them, and I left my car and went with them. Yeah, the inside was a complete disaster. I mean, there was mud everywhere. It was going to take a long time to clean it up, but there was like people that needed attention now. So they got a lot of those doctors and nurses and stuff to go up there to the old school since it was pretty out of the floodplain. So they were assisting people up in there along with National Guard and first responders. And but yeah, going into that place, I mean, you could see that the water, it didn't get super bad in there, but it looked like in the outside there was scarring in the asphalt parking lot where it actually had ripped up chunks of concrete as it was coming through there. And there's a food city that's next to it, and that whole parking lot was pretty much washed out. And on the inside of that building, there was mud on the walls, there was mud all over the glass, all over the floor, and it was just that silt, that fine silt And whenever it comes to a hospital setting, that silt and mud is some of the most dangerous stuff you can be around. A lot of nasty bacteria is in it, just all kinds. So coming into Whitesburg and with the flooding and stuff, emotions were definitely pretty rough, because these are people, it's every day like me and you that goes to work, has worked for everything they've ever owned. And for those people to go outside that morning after being rescued or whatever, the aftermath, after the flood, after everybody calmed down and got to see the damage, I mean, it's stuff that people has worked their entire lives for. And it, you know, there was a lot of sadness, because I mean, this is everyday people like me and you.
A lot of tears. I mean, I guess they knew, you know, back during the Mayfield tornado, a lot of Eastern Kentucky had gathered a lot of materials and sent it out to Mayfield. The exact same happened. A lot of Mayfield's people in that Western Kentucky, sent things to Eastern Kentucky. So the emotions were high. They had seen that they had stepped up to the plate to help other people, and people had rewarded them back by helping them, especially when they needed it most. I mean, you know, small town USA. So, I mean, everything's pretty much there. Everything's downtown. So to be able to wake up and just see basically a bowl of town being completely undaunted by water, I really couldn't imagine what was going through people's minds. It was unbelievable for me being an outsider. I grew up a lot around Kentucky and stuff, so I knew a lot of that area. And for me to even see it, it was pretty bad. I didn't honestly think that I was going to see much recovery from a lot of this, and I was very surprised how well a community can come together. I think a lot of people kind of have that frog in their throat over the 1-year anniversary, but at the same time, they take a step and look back and see how far they've came, so it kind of outweighs the bad. Things will never be exactly perfect, if they even were, but to go from that sense of normalcy to seeing everything almost completely destroyed, but to rebuild it from the ground up just shows you how strong those people actually are. Such a great community, and I'm just glad everybody come together to make it happen, because without everybody's help and the community working together, we left it.
FirstWARN Tri-Cities has had a long-standing relationship with local storm chasers, including Billy Bowen from Russell County, Virginia. Billy was one of the first people in the hardest hit zone of Whitesburg in Letcher County. Billy was also one of the first people to get pictures out of the hardest hit disaster zone and done interviews on Fox Weather and the Weather Channel the day after the flooding. Billy talks all about that day with us here on FirstWARN Tri-Cities. All right, so Billy, you was one of the first people on the ground in the Whitesburg, Letcher County area after the flooding started the morning after. So tell us, when you initially entered the Whitesburg area from the air with your drone and on the ground, what you saw.
Well, really, it actually took an act of God almost to get there. I tried, as soon as you top over Pine Mountain, you make that left, and you would go down to Whitesburg normally, and it's only about a 10 to 15 minute drive. I got about 4 miles down that road and ran into like the first backup. And believe it or not, it wasn't even due to anything in Whitesburg at the time. It was there was like a rock slab that had came down, and people had went out to try and like help clean the road, and somebody had stepped on a live power line that was down. So there's probably like a 10-mile backup. So I looped back around to Norton and took like a back way. Somehow come across the mountain right into Whitesburg, like right where everything was at. So pretty much as soon as I got into town, you know, I'd heard people talk about it on social media, but I hadn't really seen any pictures. I thought maybe it was going to be worse toward like Clintwood, some of those areas going out that way. And no, when I got into Whitesburg, you really couldn't go anywhere on the highway. Like both sides of the 4-lane were completely underwater. You're kind of navigating with 2-lane streets. And even at that, like I crossed water a few times, but it's like places you wouldn't generally see water. I know where the riverbed is there, and that's probably 20 feet above where those roads were, and they were still underwater. So as soon as I got in, the first thing that I noticed was that the school, I think it was the middle school, was completely underwater. Like you could barely see the roof. If you look through some of the pictures I have, you've got their sign, which you can't touch from the ground, and it's barely sticking out of the water in some of the first pictures that I took that day.
So talk to us about, you were one of the first one in there, so you were one of the first people to hear from people in the disaster zone. How were they reacting initially when, they saw this?
Probably in shock, just kind of like you or I would be if a lot of people said they didn't really have a warning, which, I think there was a flood emergency. But in that area, if you're, it's so rural and people are they've been there forever and they're like, yeah, it's whatever. We get these every big rainstorm. It's not a big deal. Well, somebody's garage will flood. But no, there was people that if you could actually leave your house, they were just riding around on four-wheelers. I saw people out on kayaks. They were really just in disbelief. I talked to a few people in the midst of like shooting and trying to upload stuff for LSM, and it was, they're like, well, we didn't know that it was going to be this bad, or I said it was, we saw rain like this before, not a big deal. And I don't quite think that anybody there had seen rain, 10 to 11 inches in like a 2 to 3 hour span. That's just a recipe for disaster.
You saw plenty of flooding in the past couple of years. You saw Hurley, you saw the Whitewood flooding in Buchanan County. Does this top them all?
Yeah, on terms of scale and just kind of what I covered and saw that day, I've saw a lot of really cool, like the power of flooding, I guess you would say. And I find it really interesting that everyone seems to be a little different. You have different levels of damage, like houses being moved. You see a lot of these prefab mobile homes, double wides. They're really easy. Like just a little bit of force will move them off. But to see like brick homes being washed away and roads being washed away, that's also really interesting when you come up on it. But in terms of Whitesburg, I don't think that I've ever really feared for my safety so much covering something. There's a couple times I would find little areas that I could walk and the water was still kind of in the middle of rising when I was just getting there trying to like look and document what I was seeing. And I came to a bridge that I know went across the river, but you couldn't really see that bridge anymore. There was just propane tanks, like big heating propane tanks, like 100 to 200 gallon tanks that you'd see in people's yards banging into that bridge. It's a metal bridge and they're just banging with all that current of water. There was at least 15. Do you wonder, is that gonna explode with me here 10 feet from it? I should probably leave. So I kind of based everything that I did for the first half of the day where the middle school was, because it was higher ground. I was still probably a good 20 feet above where the water line actually was. But in terms of, most destruction, most damage, just overall, holy crap moment. Yeah, this is probably the worst flood that I've covered.
You did multiple interviews that day. I know we're not your first interview about this, but Fox Weather and the Weather Channel, just to name a couple that you did that day. You're the only one that is getting us pictures, videos out of the most flood ravaged areas because all the communication lines were down starting at like 2, 3 in the morning. So, you're the only one that can get us things out of there. So what's, going through your mind at that
point? Really, when I've done it, it becomes more of a humanitarian thing. And I hate to say it like that because I feel like I'm going in, looking to help and looking to capitalize on certain things at the same time. But initially what I do first and foremost is get the drone up in the air, because having an overhead view just tells a story that you can't tell from the ground. I can take pictures of people's homes underwater. I can see people walking through flooded water up to their waists. It doesn't really tell the exact same image that you get from being above it all and seeing like the grand scale of what's actually being affected by this. But then at the same time, when you're flying, people are like, hey, do you have a phone? I need to make a call. Or do you have any water? Do you have spare water? Can you give us a ride somewhere? And 9 times out of 10, I always take water with me if I'm going to cover stuff like this because, basic human necessities, at least that I've saw on the back end of flood recovery efforts, is water. socks and shoes, general hygiene in. So you take like travel size bottles of shampoo, travel soap, a couple clean packs of socks, take a big case of water. That goes a long way for a lot of people who really don't have anything left. Seems like a small thing, but that's what I deal with when I go into places like this. And then after that, it's pretty much you get the shots that you can get. You try to be as compassionate as you can, but still try to get the video out to where the more eyes you get on something, and the faster that we've learned that help gets there. It's not necessarily help in this area, but you'd be surprised at how many churches will reach out on Facebook or other social media, and you've got disaster relief people reaching out on Twitter. It gets a little overwhelming, but they're like, hey, we're close. This is what we do. How can we help you? What do we need to do? So it's really just a first line of communication, but also kind of spreading the word of, hey, these folks need more help than they can get right now. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Billy, for your time here today, and thank you for sharing all your pictures and videos with us. We really do appreciate it.
Glad they can kind of like help tell a good story of it. Hopefully we don't have to deal with this anymore for a little while here.
Yeah, let's hope. All right. Thank you, Billy. It was a very great honor to have popular storm chaser Reed Timmer, the star of the old Discovery show Storm Chasers, join us. Reed quickly helped with relief efforts shortly after the disaster started, partnering with FlexSeal to clear out shelves at local stores. Reed talks to us about those relief efforts and how locals reacted in this full interview with us here on our FirstWARN Tri-Cities documentary, The East Kentucky Floods, 1 year later.
So yeah, on the night of the floods in Eastern Kentucky, I was watching it and I was very aware of the flood threat there, but I was actually chasing flash floods in the desert Southwest as part of monsoon season. And I was up in Flagstaff in southern Utah, working some of the flash floods and debris flows in that area. But I knew there was a summertime anticyclone over the Mid-South, and there were a lot of disturbances, a ring of fire kind of a pattern setting up that time of year. And that same disturbance caused quite a bit of flooding in southeastern Missouri before it arrived in the central and southern Appalachians. And there was a lot of moisture stacked up and a lot of storms that were congealing together, growing upscale, as we call it. And so I knew that there was a threat of very significant flooding in eastern Kentucky, but I didn't make it out there until a day or two after the floods. And I came with a relief effort with FlexSeal. And that's when I also met Chris Hall up there, the local storm chaser from Pikesville. He's from further south. He's down in Hazard, Kentucky. So yeah, he's down in Hazard, Kentucky. But that was when I met Chris Hall, working the relief operation and going up into the individual hollers as well, and seeing people that needed water and needed supplies out there. But I wasn't there the night of the flooding, but definitely was aware of just how catastrophic it was.
So talk about when you came in with FlexSeal. What all did that entail?
Yep. So I've been working with FlexSeal for a couple of years, and we've always wanted to do these relief operations. And as the flooding was happening the night before, I reached out to my contacts at FlexSeal and said, hey, we got to keep an eye on this. There's a major flooding disaster happening in eastern Kentucky. And they instantly mobilized the relief truck, got everything going on their end. And then they drove all the way up from Florida up to Kentucky. And we set up some meeting points as well, just outside of the flood zone. We met up at a Walmart and just cleared the shelves out there, loading up with supplies in the FlexSeal truck. And then we came over to Hazard, and Chris Hall had a relief operation set up there. He had it set up from the day before. Really right after the floods subsided, Chris Hall was already starting to work drop-off locations, and he set up a big command center there in Hazard where people could bring their supplies and drop them off. And I just really got to see him firsthand on Twitter running that kind of self-startup relief operation. And I was like, this is a guy that I want to work with. And so I put him in touch with FlexSeal, and we set up the drop-off location. Then we arrived with the FlexSeal truck to help out with the aftermath. And the river flooding was continuing after that. So some of those locations were still getting hammered. There was a dam breach that happened as well. Those smaller towns, they're just on the other side of the border, were hit pretty hard. But really going up into outside of Hazard, those hard hit areas, it really showed you the power of the water and the lives that were just completely disrupted out there, and many lives were lost as well, which is definitely the sad thing, the dark side that these disasters leave behind.
So when you said you basically went to Walmart and cleared the shelves, what all items did y'all get at Walmart?
Well, we got the essentials. We got water. We got non-perishables. We had clothes, things like toothpaste as well, toothbrushes. Really, the essentials like that are what we were getting there at Walmart. But we also spoke to Chris, and they needed tools as well. So we brought a lot of the mops, a lot of brooms, a lot of cleaning items out there as well. We also brought a lot of flex tape, Flex Seal products, of course. You can patch some of those holes with the homes that can get you through until you can do a full scale rebuild. But definitely came in there with a lot of the essential items and helping out after the fact. And as a storm chaser, I like to be there when the event's happening, of course. But if I can't be there and if I miss it, I was out in the desert Southwest covering the monsoon. But helping out afterward is more important, in my opinion, even as a storm chaser, going in there afterward to help out and really seeing Chris Hall do that, and the full court press that he was doing and starting all that up himself and working with the local officials there in Hazard was really an awesome thing to see firsthand.
So I know you saw many disasters over your years of storm chasing. Where does this rank on that list?
Well, definitely one of the worst flooding disasters I've ever seen. Probably the most powerful flash floods that I've ever covered in terms of the aftermath, just seeing vehicles, several feet suspended in trees, and every single creek, every river you could tell just had a mega flood that came down, and it looked like a tsunami as well. So it wasn't just a slow motion disaster like you often get with river flooding downstream of a tropical system, but you could tell it was a very fast mover, had a lot of power. You could tell that there were debris plugs on the front end of those floods, and the flows were just so powerful and so high, taking up the whole entire floodplain as well. So you could see those valleys that were completely filled up, not only with water, but also very, very large debris. And so I would say in terms of the destructive power, it's definitely one of the most extreme aftermaths that I've ever seen from a flash flooding disaster.
Because I've talked to TV meteorologists in the area and the National Weather Service up in Jackson. They've talked about the runoff and how that played a role.
Oh yeah, with flooding, definitely it's an extreme runoff event, and so you get rainfall rates that the local hydrological cycle just can't keep up with. The runoff gets more and more extreme as well. And when I'm covering flash floods, and I look for the hourly or the storm total rainfall max, and then I try to think like a fluid. I try to see where that flow would go. And it likes to follow the floodplains, follow the creeks and the rivers. And when you get that much rainfall upstream, it fills up the whole entire floodplain, whether it be 100 or 500-year floodplain or 1,000-year floodplain. You could definitely tell what the biggest floods will do. Even that floodplain back behind you, you could tell that that whole thing is capable of filling up depending on how significant the rain is. But you could see that just the whole river basin is filled up there. Definitely a very significant flooding that could be a once in a generation type of a flooding event when you look at each individual point. But it's that extreme runoff that's the big danger. And there's a flash flooding element to it. That's kind of the speed and the lack of time that you have, the lack of warning lead times a little bit with flash flooding. They arrive really quickly. Water levels will rise very quickly too, and cause a lot of catastrophic damage. But it's the extreme runoff that causes the problems. And water is 1,000 times the density of the air. And so once you get that water flowing, it causes very big problems and has immense destructive power. And you can see the hilly terrain out there on the western slopes of the Appalachians. That causes speed to the water too. So you don't just get the puddling, but you get it flowing very rapidly off the higher terrain. Orographic lift also is significant. So as that MCS or mesoscale convective system is running into the western slope of that terrain, it causes the atmosphere to squeeze out even more moisture, and you get even more prolific rainfall rates.
So as we approach the 1 year anniversary, people up there are still reeling from this. And what was their reactions right after this happened? I know with the relief efforts, you probably got to talk with some of those people.
Yeah, people were very thankful for the relief effort. They were still a little bit dazed from what happened as well. You could just tell in talking to people that it was just a day or two afterward. They were still pretty dazed as to what happened and just how significant it was, and just seeing all the destruction around you. I think that there is that little period where you kind of come to grips with the destruction of your hometown and home community all around you. There are loved ones that you likely have lost, and a lot of people were sad, and you could definitely see the sadness on their faces, but you could also feel the toughness of the people there in Eastern Kentucky. I mean, they were instantly started to rebuild. Locals helping out other locals, people helping each other out there, relief operations coming in, individual haulers definitely rallying together to help out each other. So you could definitely see the community support that everybody had, and really the toughness and resiliency of that area in Eastern Kentucky.
As we approach the 1 year anniversary, how can we bring more awareness to flash flooding events?
Well, I think what you're doing is a great step, and doing more of this and showing the aftermath, showing how long it takes to recover, showing the destruction that flooding can potentially cause, and also what to do when flooding happens. And say that, if you hear that roar upstream, or if those green boxes start getting issued for your area, those flash flood warnings, especially those with a life-threatening tag, have a plan in place and kind of use an event like this to develop a safety plan for your family if those flash floods do strike again, and be able to heed those local evacuation orders as well. But definitely increasing awareness, just discussing these floods, posting about them, posting about the threats in advance when those forecasts arrive. Share the Weather Prediction Center outlooks for excessive rainfall, those Storm Prediction Center flash flood watches too, that are actually issued by the local offices in this case. That's also important too. But posting about it on social media, I think, is definitely something that we can do. And there are a lot of other documentaries that are coming out about the event. And flooding is definitely the leading killer worldwide. And as atmospheric temperatures are getting warmer, they're capable of holding more moisture, capable of greater rainfall rates. And I think that we're seeing that with some of these MCS-driven events and tropical cyclone-driven flooding events as well. So I think that increasing awareness that way is the key to flooding.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Reed, for your time, and thank you for joining us here on First One Tri-Cities.
Thank you so much for having me. Never stop chasing.
Before we end tonight, let's talk a little bit about flash flood safety. Remember, never drive across a flooded roadway. Turn around, don't drown. When flooding is imminent and a flash flood warning is issued, get to higher ground immediately to protect you and your family. Never walk through flood waters. It only takes 6 inches of fast-moving water to knock a person off their feet. And if told to evacuate, follow all orders given by local authorities. Stay informed of local media, the National Weather Service, and your local emergency management agency for updated information. We want to thank you for joining us tonight for our special, The Floods No One Saw Coming, the Eastern Kentucky Floods 1 year later. For the entire First Warn Tri-Cities crew, I'm Skylar Doyle. We're going to leave you with these pictures from the hardest hit areas of Whitesburg, Kentucky, and Letcher County as we go off the air this evening. This has been a First Warn Tri-Cities special presentation.